I am Canadian. I was born here. My passport looks like this, and until recently, I was satisfied with that answer. But in today's social and political environment, the criteria to be accepted as a Canadian has shifted. There are some groups in this country that claim the title of true Canadian, while there are other groups that reject the title completely. So, if you were to grade me as a Canadian, what percentage would you give me?
At first glance, I fit into a lot of Canadian stereotypes. I have a love-hate relationship with my local hockey team. We've made extremely Canadian friends in our backyard. Most importantly, as both Justins have taught us, sorry. Now, I know what you're thinking. You can't give a number to something like Canadianness. And that's the problem with the social sciences, is it's very difficult to apply measurements and numbers to things like human behavior or emotions. What if we tried to figure out what criteria people would give in order to figure out how Canadian am I?
I feel like there's no one answer. I feel like it depends on where you are, like from one province to another and from like one person to another as well. That might change, but I think it's feeling like you belong here and like you have a lot to contribute to wherever you are, and seeing that there's a need and seeing that you want to help people here and you want to like help grow, like I guess, this country. But it all comes from like, I want to be involved and like I want to contribute.
But to complicate it a bit, we could also say, I suppose, that especially when we think about it politically, because what is ultimately at stake for those who understand themselves as part of a nation is often the very fate of the political community, right? So decisions are made on behalf of the nation itself.
I think what helps to define Canada's national identity is that from the very start we were built on a multicultural matrix. First of all, there are the conventional two founding nations, English and French, the two founding religions, Protestant and Catholic. So from the very beginning, we had two languages and two dominant cultures. But we're also built on a matrix of the First Nations who were here first. And I think sometimes, you know, when I was a kid, they got written out of the history books. It was all about those two founding nations. But there weren't two founding nations. There were dozens of founding nations here.
See, here's the thing. We know Canada is an insanely diverse society. Just walk around the downtown of any major city and you'll see hundreds of different races, ethnicities, cultures, beliefs being practiced. It might be why in 2015, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau used the word post-national to describe Canada, beyond one nation. Trudeau later mentioned that Canadians agree on values rather than one core identity. Values like openness, respect, and compassion, amongst others, like perhaps the Indigenous concept of welcome, as was suggested by Charles Gordon of the Vancouver Sun in 2017.
I would say values. I would say culture draws people in, but I think what keeps people and makes them connect on a deeper level is really values, because those are things that are less likely to change, especially your core values and like the things that you've built your identity on. So those things will always stay with you.
I found a report by the Angus Reid Institute about Canadian values, just to see how much we actually agree on. And yeah, Canadians agree on a lot of things. Most Canadians are proud to be Canadian and believe we're doing better than other similarly developed countries. Most Canadians agree on the importance of oil in our economy and the importance of agreements like NAFTA. And about 2/3 of Canadians agree that immigrants are doing well to integrate in their communities, but believe that ethnic minorities should be doing more to fit into mainstream society. They also reported that 73% of Canadians over the age of 65 have a deep attachment to Canada. But when they asked people in the 18 to 24 age range, this number went down to 45%. And that wasn't the only number that shocked me. We're split on a number of other issues as well. When it comes to government regulation of the economy, environmental protection, rehabilitative justice, special statuses for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, our trust of the news media, and even the maintenance of the British monarchy as our head of state, Canadians are divided almost exactly in half. When asked to identify with one position on the political spectrum, almost a third of the respondents to the survey responded equally to the left, right, and center. So it's no secret that we're going through a period of division in Canada.
One of the problems of the nation is that it always kind of comes back to these base level questions of who's in and who's out, and so any effort to kind of reduce that or dilute that somewhat I think should be welcomed. The ultimate question really is, how do you generate a sense of belonging and community amongst differences and also without trying to erase them?
I think that being a Canadian isn't about when you got here. It's not about whether you're old stock or whether you got here last Tuesday. It's not about whether you're gay or straight. It's not about whether you're cis or trans. You can interpret being Canadian in all kinds of different ways.
In my case specifically, as a child of immigrants, I can feel alienation from my home country of Canada as well as from the countries that my parents are from. There's always going to be an element of me that doesn't quite belong in either country. Now, to account for that, I've chosen to hyphenate my identity, but not all Canadians feel comfortable doing this because some consider it a little bit divisive, while others think it's unnecessary. Like, when I wasn't watching The Zone on YTV or searching for house hippos in between my heritage minutes, I was watching movies like this.
So it's just like another richness that you bring and that defines who you are as a person. For me, it's like I grew up in French, it's my first language, I identify with the culture. To me, they're both combined, like humans are very holistic.
Citizenship is merely a political status conferred on an individual who has a legal status within a political community. I think that actually what really is important is not so much saying this is what Canada means and therefore you owe something to it, but these are your obligations as a citizen, regardless of how you understand your national identity, right?
An uncomfortable part of me wonders if I've just conformed to these really stereotypical Canadian things in an effort to feel some sense of belonging to this country.
We can have a lot of fun with those stereotypes, but I think we have to know that at the end of the day, they're reductive, and not all Canadians love hockey. You know, when the Raptors won the NBA championships and people were out in the streets of Toronto jumping up and down and celebrating, that they were every bit as Canadian as the people who were still waiting for the Maple Leafs to win the Stanley Cup.
Out of the country, I seem as Canadian as a Canuck in a canoe. But when I'm home, I'm reminded of how divided we are as a country and what stereotypes actually belong to us. The West doesn't actually have bagged milk. I want to belong here. I want being Canadian to be more than this. So, does Canada have an identity crisis?
You know, whatever we would like Canada to be, it will never be a homogenous country with one core identity. It can't be. Think about what a huge country this is. Think about how different our geographies and our climates are. Think about how different our Indigenous peoples are. Think about how different the patterns of immigration are. Why would you aspire to be boring, one-note, bland, dull, when you could be rich and diverse and delightful, when you could eat the foods of the world without leaving the West Edmonton Mall food court? This is the extraordinary gift of what it means to be a Canadian. That you can have it all, and you can have it all here in a country that values peace, order, good government, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience.
Well, I think every country, every nation have identity crises because they always have to sort of reckon with the notion that who they are or who they have been is changing, right? And the question really is not how do we get to a point where it's no longer having an identity crisis, but how do we recognize the moments when that identity crisis becomes particularly important, right? Becomes particularly problematic, becomes particularly real. And we're definitely in one of those moments, I think, and we probably have been for 10 or 15 years.
We're not done forging a national identity, that's for sure. But enough Canadians are thinking about it to continue to work at it. Canada's coat of arms sums it up nicely. The translation? They desire a better country.
So, if you were to grade me as a Canadian, what percentage would you give me?
Do you feel Canadian?
I do feel Canadian.
Are you proud to be a Canadian?
Yes.
If you went away to graduate school in another country, would you still feel Canadian?
Yes, I would.
So you only speak English?
Yes.
Okay, only speak English. Have you been to any other provinces?
Yes, I have.
How long have you lived here?
I was born here.
Okay, what is your favourite food?
Do you like the outdoors? What's your favorite sport?